One of the main reasons that you're here is, like us, you're big fans of Simon Sinek. And so we make no apology for including a number of clips of Simon speaking. He's always worth listening to. Hopefully, there'll be some that you won't have seen. They're all relevant to the subject matter of this webinar. Where we do apologise is that the quality of some of the clips is not as good as we'd like, but still worthwhile watching nevertheless. As you will probably know, Simon has been evangelising about his views on work and society in a broader sense for quite some time now, and it seems that he's finally starting to get the sort of recognition that he deserves. Although we have only heard about Simon's work relatively recently, we've been developing similar ideas for the last 10 years or so. When Ram and I first heard some of Simon's work, we were amazed because in essence Simon was summarising what we had long believed and in fact been independently writing. Ram as part of his PhD and me when I was doing my MBA. Before I go on, let me give you a brief background about Ram and me, the two founders of Riddlebox. Let's take Ram first. Briefly, he's an electronics engineer with a master's in robotics and control, and further went on to study for his PhD, and as part of the research for that, he developed a framework to measure the value of human capital, which is obviously relevant to the subject of this webinar. He also has an MBA, which specialised in business strategy. Very much the academic, Ram is the author of several books on the subject. Ram likes to think of himself as an engineer with a heart. From my point of view, although I did my degree in economics and politics, I have a postgraduate qualification in corporate finance and spent much of my corporate career in private equity. And in fact, was the head of private equity for KPMG, structuring management buy-ins and buyouts. I also have an MBA, part of which looked at the interface between business and sport, which was particularly relevant to me because I'm passionate about team performance and sports coaching, and have been coached the Great Britain Junior Rowing Squad, and in fact coached them at the World Championships in 2004. So why are we such big Simon Sinek fans? Well, I'm sure you've all probably heard this following clip from Simon.
I'm an idealist. I have a vision of a profoundly different world than the world that exists now. I want to live in a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and come home fulfilled at the end of the day. That is not the world we live in now. That is the world I want to live in, and that is the world I want my friends and family to live in.
Exactly. We couldn't agree more. But we didn't think anyone was listening. And then we heard Simon. It felt great to know that we weren't alone, and that these ideas were gaining traction around the world. And you've got to remember that Ram and I have been around a bit longer than Simon and have first-hand experience of some of these archaic business practices that he talked about, and which have been generally accepted, in our opinion, for far too long. Remember this.
All of those techniques used to build a company in the 80s and 90s, they're not working anymore. And companies are struggling more than they used to, but they're still applying the same old techniques. And so it gets harder and harder, and the stresses go up and up, and working in these companies is more and more difficult just from a stress standpoint or stability standpoint. So what happens? Innovation suffers, engagement suffers, productivity suffers, trust suffers, cooperation suffers.
The old ideas of the hire and fire, rank and yank attitude of the 70s and 80s, and to some extent the 90s, just didn't work anymore. To go back to what he said in the first clip, that he envisaged a world where people were truly happy and inspired to go to work, how much better a world would that be? And in fact, he goes on.
And here's the folly, it's good for business. That's the joke. That's the joke, which is people who know their why, people who are working for companies that align with their why, people who feel like they belong, people who feel trusted and trusting, people who feel that their work is valued and valuable, work harder, are more productive, are more innovative, they are much better employees. And the joke is when we offer our people that, those companies invariably outperform their competition over the long term.
If you treat people properly and invest in them so that they feel wanted and trusted and cooperative with their colleagues and proud of what they're doing, you're actually investing in the success of the business. Or to put it another way, a key ingredient here is the workplace environment, or as we at Riddlebox say, the workplace experience. And Simon is quite unequivocal about not only the importance of workplace environment as a determinant of performance, but also he's quite clear about who bears the responsibility for establishing the quality of that environment.
The only variable inside an organization is the environment. That is entirely within our control, and that's the leader's responsibility. And if the leaders make the people feel like they're given an education on how to do their job, the opportunity to try and try again, and again and again, the opportunity to build their confidence and become their best selves, the opportunity to interact and build strong relationships. This is what I mean by feeling safe.
You'll have noticed how Simon keeps using the word feeling. So how we feel at work, our emotions, are absolutely key in terms of how we're likely to perform. And actually it's no surprise because it's all a matter of biology. Here's Simon again.
It's biology. It's biology. If you look at a cross-section of the human brain looking from the top down, the human brain evolved into three major areas that corresponds with this little idea. The outside area, the what level, is our newest brain, our Homo sapien brain, called our neocortex. The neocortex is responsible for all of our rational and analytical thought and language. The middle two sections, why and how, make up our limbic brains. Our limbic brains are responsible for all of our feelings, like trust and loyalty. It's also responsible for all human behavior, all decision-making, and it has no capacity for language. The part of the brain that controls behavior does not control language, and so we rationalize. This is where gut decisions come from. This is why we say, I don't know, it just felt right. Why do we use the verb to feel to describe a decision? It's because the part of the brain that controls feelings controls decision-making, that's why. And we all know that those are higher quality decisions anyway. When all you can give are the facts and figures as to why you should or shouldn't do something, the highest level of confidence you can give is, I think this is the right decision. But we all know there are decisions we make in our lives that I know the facts and figures say that we should do that. It just doesn't feel right though. And you ask the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, what's your secret? They all say the same thing, trusted my gut.
So to summarize, it's our feelings generated in our limbic brain which dictate our thoughts and our decision making. Once a decision has been made, our neocortex, which is responsible for language, justifies that decision with logic and rationale. The trouble is, you can't measure feelings. In business, we have numbers to measure every aspect of the organisation, from headcount to profit, turnover to debt, everything. But there's no number to measure feelings, so you can't actually prove to the doubters and the cynics that what Simon says is absolutely right. And that is that there is a distinct correlation between business success and how people feel. Simon Sinek admits as much himself.
Now, if you think about business, we have a million metrics to figure out someone's performance. And we have negligible or no metrics to discern someone's trustworthiness.
But now there is. For the last 8+ years, while Simon has been developing and publishing his ideas on work, we've been developing a way to accurately and justifiably measure feelings quickly and easily. Before we go on to have a good look at what we've developed to measure feelings, let's just make it clear that we're not talking about engagement surveys. Engagement surveys deal with what people are thinking, whereas we want to know what people are feeling. It's important to differentiate between the two because, as Simon's pointed out, what we feel will dictate what we think and ultimately what we do. There are a couple of recent examples which illustrate the difference between emotions and feelings and thoughts. There's a strong argument to show that the EU referendum in the UK and the election of Donald Trump in the USA were emotional decisions based on feelings rather than rational ones based on thoughts. The opinion polls in each case got it wrong because essentially they asked people what they were thinking, whereas when people actually got to vote, they vote emotionally. Slogans like "Take Back Control" and "Make America Great Again" tapped into people's emotions rather than any sophisticated rational analysis. You may have seen recent headlines about the political strategy company Cambridge Analytica and the quote from Mark Turnbull, their MD. It's no good fighting an election campaign on the facts, because it's all about emotion. Anyway, that's probably the basis for a separate webinar in its own right, not this one. We can go into that in more detail later if anyone wants us to raise it as a question, or would like to discuss it separately. So how does what we've invented work? As you can probably imagine, this is not very easy to explain because it's based on years and years of detailed research and development, which has resulted in the establishment of a huge database of responses to thousands and thousands of different questions relating to people's feelings and emotions about their workplace experience. To summarize, extensive analysis of this database has enabled us to distill the essence of the workplace experience into 5 key elements. And interestingly, because this was being done before any of us were aware of Simon Sinek's theories, it was quite gratifying to note that our scientifically based conclusions correspond very closely with what he believes and has been saying. Our research shows that basically there are 5 key elements which determine the quality of the workplace experience, or as Simon describes it, environment. They can be summarized as follows. Trust, i.e., do I trust the organization I'm in? Empathy, is the organization's empathetic to my personal circumstances? Satisfaction, how satisfied am I with the work that I do here? Commitment, how committed am I to doing to my job? And finally, loyalty, how loyal am I to this organization? The most important of these is trust. And here Simon and we are on exactly the same page.
When we're surrounded by people who believe what we believe, something remarkable happens. Trust emerges. And make no mistake of it, trust is a feeling, a distinctly human feeling. Trust is not a checklist. Simply doing everything you say you're going to do does not mean people will inherently trust you. It just means you're reliable. We need trust, right? We need trust. When we're surrounded by people who believe what we believe and trust starts to emerge, when we trust them and they trust us, we're more willing to take risks. We're more willing to experiment, which requires failure. We're more willing to explore and go somewhere that no one has ever gone before with the confidence that if we fail, if we trip over, if we turn our backs, that those within our community, those who we trust and who trust us, will look after us while we're gone, will pick us up when we fall over, will help us when we're hurt. Our very survival depends on it.
Obviously, the other elements are important too, and it's the interrelationship of people's responses concerning these elements which enables our big data service to calculate a robust and justifiable score relating to the workplace experience or environment. We're more than happy to explain the science behind our calculations in some detail, but now is perhaps not the time to do it. Suffice it to say that our database contains thousands of separate data points and algorithms through which responses are processed to provide instant experience or environment assessments. So how do we get the information that we need to be able to provide these assessments or scores? Well, actually it's quite simple. This is basically it. Here you can see the questions that we ask to establish how people feel about their workplace experience or environment. Most people's reaction when they see this is to say, how is it possible to generate such incredible insights from such simple and frankly brief questions? Well, obviously from our point of view that's the clever bit, and is the result of all those years of generating questions, collating responses, aggregating the data and generating the algorithms. Suffice it to say that it works. As you can probably appreciate, it's not just a case of taking all the scores together and dividing by 5. It doesn't work that way. The score is not an average. The score is a complex relationship between emotions and experience expressed in the responses to the questions that you can see. And of course, the scores of the 5 individual elements do not have the same weighting. As we mentioned before, and as Simon confirmed in his video, the most important one is trust. I hope you can appreciate that this process is extremely simple and easy, so that it's far from an onerous task for you or your colleagues to complete. Once you hit the submit button, the responses are processed through the algorithms of our big data service, and the results appear instantaneously on your leader's dashboard, like this. There's a lot of information here, so let's see what it's telling us. The first element is the number, which is the score relating to the workplace experience, derived from the responses to the questions we saw just now. And you can compare this number with the benchmark score for your particular industry, which can obviously be a very useful starting point and puts your score into some sort of perspective. Further down, you can see how your organization's workplace experience score breaks down into the 5 constructs we looked at earlier, thereby immediately identifying strengths and weaknesses. You'll also notice that on each dial there is another pointer. This indicates what you, as a leader, think is the experience score you are delivering to your colleagues. In an ideal world, the gap between the two should be as small as possible. In short, it provides an indication of your effectiveness as a communicator. To summarize, these dials and pointers are showing you instantly not only what you, as a leader, think is the experience that you are creating for those people that report to you, but also what those people believe to be the experience score that you are actually creating. The difference between the two can be quite revealing. Ideally, perception and reality should be as close together as possible. In other words, this dashboard graphically highlights what your organization needs to do to increase its experience score, but also what you as a leader need to do to be effective in implementing any changes that might be identified. Please remember that this experience or environment score is a reflection of how people feel, which is a precursor to how they're going to behave. In effect, you're getting a foresight of what is likely to happen in the future. And why is this important? And why is it important to concentrate on how people feel? Well, put simply, and to quote Simon Sinek from earlier, it's good for business. Let me repeat that. It's good for business. The evidence is overwhelming and growing to prove that the better the workplace experience, the better the productivity, the better the innovation, the better the profitability, the better the staff retention, and so on and so on and so on. I'm sure it'll come to you as no surprise, ladies and gentlemen, to hear that we at Riddlebox firmly believe that an organization's experience score should be and will become one of the most important metrics in corporate accounts to measure performance. It is no exaggeration to say that if you concentrate on increasing your experience score, all the other metrics will follow. Simple as that. I appreciate that in this webinar there's been a lot to take in, and we've covered a great deal in a relatively short space of time. I'm sure you'll agree that we've dealt with some fairly challenging concepts. I'm sure that some of you have got some questions that you want to ask, and I know from my colleagues that we've already had some questions come in, which is great. And now I propose to address those and any more that you care to send me.